it's a pleasure for us to have you around. And thank you very much, Guillermo, for your effort.
I just have to twist her arm a little bit. That's it. Yeah. She was a lot for it anyway.
Latin Americans are sharp, Eleanor. They're all going to be here 10 minutes after the time. So we have a little chat here while people are coming in.
2 minutes before. 2 minutes before.
All right, okay. But I'm not talking about the
Hi, Eleanor.
Eleanor, the people that we already have here. Silvio and Andrea are those very keen graduate students. Marianne is a professor at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. So for now, you only have the really strong people, right?
Just to think about your sabbatical, El.
Oh, where might I go?
In Rio de Janeiro?
Yeah, well, you'll have plenty of opportunities.
You want to go to Rio?
Yeah. Why not? Very welcome. Eleni and me, Eleni and me, we are open our doors with very pleasure for you if you want.
Thank you. Well, yeah, I'm hoping COVID will go.
Not for Eleanor, please, everyone.
Well, COVID hopefully will be under control, and then we can start actually visiting and doing that cross-cultural stuff that we love doing, but it's been crazy.
After all the craziness that we had here in Brazil and in most of Latin America, at least we're starting to have the feeling that things are getting better. We may be wrong still. We may have another, one of those new waves and everything, but people are getting vaccinated, which was a huge challenge. So we're all getting a little, we see that there is light at the end of the tunnel, and we think it's not the train coming.
Yeah.
The opposite direction.
Exactly. Yeah. Now comes the people, like what we've been having here is people who are vaccinated are getting it, but not as bad, because the kids at school and everything like that, and it's weird because it'll be like 4 kids on the bus or in a car, and 2 of them aren't vaccinated, 2 of them are, the 2 that are get COVID, and the 2 that aren't. So it's starting to get really bizarre with what's going on.
But I think the way I defend the vaccine here is that, in the past, we all got vaccinated, and no one had the disease, but we never had such an intense, contamination, let's say, So probably, no vaccine is probably 100% effective anyway, but we are in a situation where some of us get vaccinated, and the vaccine is not so good for that individual, but for the collective, it's definitely working.
And it's less.
Or maybe we just
I think it's they're getting less of an effect. So if they do get it, it's not as bad, which I think that's what we're seeing now, is that
also,
not quite like the flu, but more that you're able to get over it at home, which is good.
I think it will, and at some stage it will become just like the regular flu. We have to think that the flu was already influenza, right? The big thing 100 years ago. So,
right. Yeah.
I guess it's another cycle.
Yeah. But I think not that aggressive.
Yeah, I don't know.
The flu was not that aggressive on it, or COVID?
No, I mean they call it COVID.
Yeah, we wish it will not be aggressive in the future. Yeah.
That's what.
God, let's hope.
So Donna, is everything ready for ABSIS in Panama?
Guillermo, don't do that.
I didn't do it. It's already there.
Donna, I've already told these people at AIS that we have the connection in Panama, and that person is named Donna Roper, right?
The one that's going to make everything happen. Yeah.
Yeah, no problem.
And of course, we'll have all her students to also help. Seriously, there is a committee that is working on this proposal, and it's pretty advanced already. In fact, I'm part of it.
It's actually a given. It's a given. It's going to be Panama City.
It is Panama. Yeah.
It's not going to be all your job. Yeah.
All that is Guillermo's making.
Actually, no. I have to swear that I am innocent in this case. Yeah.
Yeah, Guillermo. This time, and only this time, he's innocent. But don't worry, we're not going to push a lot of work on you, but you have to do a lot of entertaining there. You and your students will all be there. Yeah. We'll all be there.
I want to tell you, Alexandra, it's amazing how I see my students writing in English.
Well, I gave them a hint. I told them that even if they wrote it in Spanish first and put it in Google Translator, it would be good enough for us to understand. So I think some of them are using that hint. But it's great that they are courageous enough to get involved in this and sometimes even after.
But it's amazing. It's amazing. That's what I mean. It's amazing.
And they're very serious. Several of them have been exchanging WhatsApp messages with me and asking me about details. Eleanor, what we do, of course, they all received, you had sent us the 3 papers, and we tell them, well, you're going to be watching a talk in a different language. So use that at least as a way of getting, into the subject already. So some of the people that will be with us are graduate students that are still in their masters. In fact, we even have some undergraduates that are here with us. And then we have more experience like Silvio and Andrea. We have some more experienced graduate students as well. So it's a huge, it's a bunch of, a very mixed bunch, but the students are really eager and they got involved, and they read the papers first, and they discuss ideas in a forum. So we're really excited with this.
I got some are against of the opinions. They tell me I'm not with the opinion they gave of my paper of the essay. I said, well, that's part of the education.
One thing that we learn with time, Donna, and that's something that you can tell them, is that we all have a lot of opinions. After we start studying, we notice that we should have less opinions and more doubts.
And you can't believe everything just because it's written.
At the same time, of course, it's good that they challenge the ideas that they see in those papers, because that means that then they have their own research to develop. But they shouldn't have an opinion. They should then work on that and make sure that they get to some more, at least, or at least that their opinion is more based on real studies and not just on what they feel like.
Yeah, one paper is just a point,
Yeah.
right? It's not proof. Well, it's an indication, but it's not. Does it prove the theory? It just says that we haven't found anything against that. So.
And many times, the paper is a way that we have to start a dialogue with the community, right? It's not that we're exactly what you said, Eleanor. We're saying, well, this is where I got to from the research that I did, with all the limitations that my research had. So now, please, someone else start from there and go further, or push us in a different direction.
Well, on the topic today, that's what I found, is that I might mention this later on, but when I was doing my dissertation and was interested in looking at differences between gender, and was told that's already been done, in the technology acceptance model, TAM, they didn't find anything. It was just age. So don't bring gender in as anything. And I think that now what we've seen is people actually did, who weren't PhD students at the time, and it's become, we've seen the differences, right? That there are some differences. So for those of you who are
we're discouraged. We're discouraged by people that were there and should be the ones that should push us towards the topic. But I guess people who probably gave you that kind of opinion, what they were doing was they thought, well, you have that path, but you also have this path here, and I think that this path is promises more, let's say, rewards or whatever. And of course, that was it depended on their own lenses. It's always like that, right? So,
right. Yeah, their past and their experiences, exactly.
Yeah.
Alexander, should we get started?
Well, I guess so. We'll surely have some more people joining us during the talk.
Even for Latin American punctuality is time, right?
Yeah. Go on with our formal introductions, Guillermo.
Because we have Marianne and Donna here. I mean, and Eleanor, which is kind of important. So yeah, I think we're ready to start. Very good. Well, it is my pleasure to introduce my dear colleague Eleanor Loiacono, who, besides being having the privilege of calling my friend, now I share the floor with her. We're just a few offices away because I just joined where she was. I'm following her. And so Eleanor is an associate professor at the College of William and Mary, the Raymond A. Mason School of Business. And before doing that, before arriving to Mason, she was a professor of information technology and data science, and the co-founder and the director of the Inclusive Design Accessibility Idea Hub at the Worcester Polytechnic Institute. Her expertise centers on the intersection of technology and the user. Over the past 20 years, she has focused on how people feel about technology they use, and how the technology they use, and how technologies such as mobile applications and social media can improve users' experiences. She is particularly interested in how those with differing abilities interact with technologies, and she currently serves as co-chair for the Association for Information Systems COVID-19 Small Business Digitization Initiative, a global undertaking that has over 31 universities participating worldwide. Today, Eleanor is going to talk to us about a particular grant that centers on how female IT professors face certain challenges when going up the ladder of the academic career. So, Eleanor, welcome. Thank you for being with us. Bienvenida, bem-vinda.
Thank you very much, Guillermo. I appreciate you guys having me here today. Since I can't see you, please speak up if there's any questions you have. I want this to be able to be a discussion and be able to answer questions and that. But today I am going to talk about, or the motivation and kind of the actual what we're doing as part of the Impact IT grant with AIS. And it really, in terms of giving you a background, I'm going to talk about gender in the information systems discipline, kind of the motivation that got us doing this grant, as well as what we're doing with the grant right now. So this is the abstract that you had. I'll just mention that, as I mentioned in the abstract, that one particular relevant piece or paper, the JIS paper, is something that really kind of helped solidify kind of how we were going to go for this grant and the unique perspective we were going to take, which is take an association perspective. These are the references, so I hope everybody got them. If you haven't, you can take a look at the website impactit.pages.wm.edu, and that tells you more about the grant if you have questions, but I'm happy for people to ask me questions now or email me later. So the motivation for this, and as you can kind of see, I use this example, a visual of all these kind of strings of different colors kind of mingled together, because there were a lot of pieces that motivated us, and me in particular, for wanting to take a look at this issue. And at first, it kind of all started really back in 2010. So I was tenured. I was asked to serve as a co-chair for the ICIS breakfast, so the preeminent IS conference, and we had a breakfast, a women's breakfast every year, usually at like 7 o'clock in the morning, some ungodly hour, and we would have talks and things like that. And so I was asked to do that, and I thought, well, this is great. I've liked going to these breakfasts. I'd be happy to. We usually did it for about 3 years in a row, and then we would pass it on. And what we started to get, really kind of in a weird way, is some pushback. So my co-chair and I, Kathy Urquhart, had set it up, and we were ready to do this, and we wanted to add some other things to it, a network across the year, and have some push notifications and things like that. We had actually done a survey to ask women what they wanted, and we started hearing from people that, well, the name had been changed, and that that there was some issues. And so when we dug a little further, we realized that there was some pushback from some senior scholars who felt like, well, their anecdotal evidence was, well, there's enough, we see women at these conferences all the time, and they're, why are they having a women's breakfast? Men aren't allowed, which actually men were always welcome to be part of it. The idea was just to predominantly discuss issues that related to women, oftentimes more than men, but, childcare at things and issues that they faced. And so that kind of got us thinking about, well, do we still need the ICIS breakfast? And we actually did a panel on that. But the big thing was that really worried me is that we didn't have any data to refute, or, regularly, as we were talking about earlier, people were having these anecdotal evidence of like, oh, we see a lot of women here, so therefore there must be enough women in the field. But we had no data to actually refute that or to counter that. And so a couple of things we did. The first is created the AIS Women's Network College, which was the first college of the AIS. And that was really to say, okay, this is important. This is an area that it's not necessarily research related, but is very important to us. And, we need to look at these issues. And so we're going to be a formal organization. And then later followed the Senior Scholars College and the College of Academic Leadership. So that's kind of formalizing the AIS Women's Network. The other thing that I started to do is I said, okay, we need some data, because there was no data there. And I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of what I did to gather that data, but to kind of give you a little bit of background about the data. There wasn't anything in IS, but there was information when I looked for women in STEM, or the STEM fields, right? And there's this concept called the Leaky Pipeline. I don't know, I wish I could ask you and see your hands if anybody could raise them and say, yes, I know about that or not, but I'll just kind of describe it. So the Leaky Pipeline is a phenomenon that's been seen in pretty much all of the STEM fields, that you have about 50-50 in terms of women and men starting out in their graduate degrees, like MD, terminal degrees, like MD and PhD. But as they progress through their careers, so you see it drops at postdoc by about 5%. Then tenure, assistant to associate, again, you see more have dropped, another 15%. or 10-15%. And then you see by the time you look at full, a majority, a huge chunk of that, 80% are men, and only usually less than 20% are women. So women have kind of leaked out of this pipeline. And I did have the little droplets red at one time. It just looked kind of more like blood. So I thought this is better. But you kind of get the point that women are, as they go through the careers, are leaking out of academia. And so it's not a great slide, but I did want to show that some of the issues kind of within that could be things like if you look at married, women who are married and are mothers, they're even, they're less, there's a 35% lower odds than married fathers to get tenure, the same for going on and getting full and things like that. So there was research out there in the STEM fields, just not our STEM field of IS. And so that kind of is what I'm indicating here, is there wasn't any data available. And so I felt if we wanted to keep the college alive, if we really wanted to show that there was an issue, just like the other STEM fields with women in IS, that we had to do some data collection. And so I actually went out and with some of my GAs, we looked at all of the AACSB accredited universities within the US. Now this data is based on the US. We did then collect it more globally, but for the grant, the data was just the US because the National Science Foundation tends to want to see US centric data. But we collected the data, looked at it, we saw very similar things to the other STEM fields in terms of the number of faculty. So women were about 25% of the overall faculty. That was higher when you looked at clinical or adjunct faculty members. And as you look, as you went from assistant to associate to full, you really saw women kind of stopping at associate. So this decrease going from associate to full. So women went down to about like 20%, like we had seen with the other STEM fields. And then we also looked at, in the JIS paper, looked at the awards that the women represented in receiving AIS awards and in AIS leadership. And again, those were low, about 10% or less when you look at that. So the representation of women in IT was low in our field, similar to the other STEM fields. So this is kind of got us thinking about, well, there is funding to study this and to try and impact this for the STEM areas. So maybe we should be thinking about that. The other interesting thing, and this is what the JIS paper was really kind of eye-opening to me with thinking about doing this grant and kind of proposing this grant and looking at the association, is that one of the questions when we did a survey looking at AIS members was to look at job satisfaction. What made people satisfied with their job, right? And so we had questions looking at the university where the people worked and also the association. And what we found is that men typically had higher job satisfaction than women. And the model, so the regression, when we did the regression, it was very clear that the biggest contributor or impact on a man's job satisfaction was their university and how they felt their university was treating them. For a woman, it was both the university and the association, right? So how tied they felt to the community and what opportunities the association gave for them. And some of the things that we kind of thought of is, if there are fewer women, then being able to have kind of a community of women who were studying the same area in an association meant that association meant more to you. But what it really told us is that a lot of, in looking at grants, the money that had been funded to support women in the STEM fields through the advance program and the National Science Foundations, in the National Science Foundation, and so they supported funds for studying women in STEM and how to help them. That most of the research that had been done and grant funding that had gone out was looking at how it could help universities. So how universities could help women through their careers. And a lot had been funded on looking at women going from assistant to associate, so that tenure process, and had been done a lot. And now they were focusing at looking at how to help women from that really difficult associate to full. And so again, still at the university level. But what we found really is that associations really matter. And so we were saying, well, so much of going from associate to full requires that the person be looked at as a leader. that they have external evaluation letters that say this person is a leader and that this person is top in their field and so forth. And so what we thought is, well, the association, it's people that are your peers that are going to get these letters, are going to write these letters, that it's important to get them to understand, right? And to get the association to understand how they can help women. And to give you an example, one of the things I've served on a promotion committee, many promotion committees when I was at WPI, and one of the things, there's research out there to support this, is that women are often defined or described in their external letters when they go up for promotion very differently than men. So oftentimes the criteria at a university is, we want you to be a leader, we want you to be outstanding in your field, we want this person to be an individual who stands out, and it's all about them, right? They're great. But oftentimes you get a lot of that language like leadership, individual, conquering, and very, very individualistic words, right? That somebody would typically associate with the criteria that's often designated in these policies for a university for when somebody goes up. But women are often described as collaborative, helpful, right? Very different language. So when, and this was something that I saw as well, when you're looking at the criteria that's laid out in your handbook, your faculty handbook, as promoting somebody, the language may not be there, right? And so that's one of the things that also started getting us thinking, well, that can't be done at the university level. It has to be done at the higher level, like an association where you have people who are going to be writing these letters for others. And so this, made us really start looking at what can we do at the association level to help. And we went to leaderships at the time. Alan Dennis was the president, and I sat down with Alan and I said, look, we'd really, we had this grant, because the advanced grant cycle is that if you submit something and you don't get it, which typically people don't get it the first time, you have time to revise it. They don't accept another round of submissions for another 2 years. So it takes some time. So at that point I had submitted, and we didn't get it, but got really good feedback, talked to the program chair, and then talked to Alan. I said, I'd really like to submit this in. If we have the support of the AIS leadership, I think this would make for a really good grant, because we'd be able to focus on this. And so that's what came out of this, was we actually did get the Impact IT grant, and it stands for Increasing the Participation and Advancement of Women in Information Technology, with a focus on the issues that women face from going from associate to full. One thing I'll just state here real quickly as well is that they found, similar to the tenure process, if you look at kind of how they've helped women and getting through the tenure process, that the same things that they've done to kind of help women have also helped men. So it just made the process clearer for all involved. And so even though this is focused on women going from associate to full, the idea is that it would be helpful to everyone who would be making that change, and we'd be, especially those who may have what we would call intersectional issues that they may be dealing with. So, if you have people from underrepresented groups that are trying to go forward, that may have not really had an understanding of what that process is like, by making it clearer, you're making it easier. By making people aware of things that women face, you're also making them aware of what other underrepresented groups may face. Real quick, I just want to open it real quick if anybody has any questions on what I've said so far. If not, I can just move on.
Maybe, Eleanor, so that you don't feel that you're alone there. I mean, when you were showing the job satisfaction slide there, and then of course you made it clear that, I mean, it sort of relates to some of the stereotypes that we already have about men and women, women being more collaborative and men being more, let's say, individualistic somehow. But did you check in your research if those stereotypes really fit, or at least if they fit people in our profession, in our area?
Yeah, we didn't dive into that. That's a really good question, and I think follow up to that would be fascinating, even in doing some interviewing, because one of the things that we thought of is that, well, exactly what I said, women may want to be more collaborative. Women may want, because there's fewer women at their university in their particular area, that they want to have that interaction, that the association really matters to them. So I definitely think that would be interesting to follow up on. We didn't dive into that a little bit deeper. We just kind of looked at what was the satisfaction and what was the impact of the university versus the association. I think we will find out more because we are doing some interviews with the grant, and so we probably will find out some more subtleties to that as well.
Okay, yeah, because sometimes I think we're all very impacted by those stereotypes, but I sometimes I doubt, I'm not sure if the stereotypes really still fit us, or if they fit us so precisely as we create those different groups in our minds.
Yeah, I mean, we were surprised. We didn't think that we would necessarily find that men, relied more on the university, or that they, the university was more of what they felt jobs. They felt satisfaction from how the university supported them, and not as much in AIS. So it could be a sample, right?
Or maybe then reinforcing the stereotype and thinking that men are more pragmatic in their choices. They say, well, if my boss is happy with me, it doesn't matter what happens, elsewhere.
Exactly.
But it's again reinforcing the stereotype.
Well, and it could even mean that they handle their networks very differently, right? Like that's something else that would be interesting to look, because women may be finding their networks through the AIS, and men may be finding their support networks, something that maybe we're looking at in the grant is kind of research networks and that support. So yeah, I think there's still much more work that could be done in this area. But thank you for your question. Any other questions before I kind of jump into the grant? And there's going to be plenty of time for Q&A at the end as well, I believe. So let me just go ahead and jump in and introduce the team that's working on this. So I'm the PI at William & Mary. Lakshmi Iyer at Appalachian State is a co-PI, along with Elizabeth Lingo Long from WPI. This had started when I was at WPI. Michelle Carter and Adrian Randolph are consultants on it. And one of the interesting things with that is we actually wanted them to be PIs, but at the time, it was hard to not all institutions are set up to easily get grants and to be able to do this. So we had to bring them on as consultants. And then we have Cindy Carlson, who's our project coordinator. So even though it's a team of all women from the United States, what you'll see later on is that we have created these working groups from people globally with very different, coming from all different types of experiences and different genders and that, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But the goal of the project, again, because we're focusing on women in IT, is to address the lack of gender equity within IS academia, because we saw, right, we had collected that information to see that there were actually less women, that the problem was at the process of kind of that point of going from associate to full, so increasing the number of women, especially at the rank of full professor, and then catalyzing action and accountability so that we could actually measure, right? We need to be able to measure. So not only do we need to change it, but we need to make sure that we can actually measure it over time, and that we can see that women, these efforts that we're doing are actually working to help women get to full. And so we created a three-pronged approach. This is kind of in the grant, kind of how we defined it is, all of this is based on data. So AIS did not collect data on gender, ethnicity, country. They would say, where are you working? But they wouldn't necessarily say or ask about, here's where you're working, but then this is the culture kind of where you're coming from, because sometimes those have intersectional effects on people and their work. So everything was in this, collecting data to see how we're doing, where we are, and where we're going, and are we actually able to see that we've progressed. Within that, we are looking at an assessment. So how do we look at the AIS's policies, procedures, the structures that they have? How do we make sure that we don't have implicit bias in there, and that we're making sure that people, it's fair to all? What best practices are we doing? We actually looked this past year at best practices that AIS is already doing that we want to encourage to be kept up. Things that we could bring from outside, from other associations that they're doing, and things that we could create internally to help that process. And then doing implicit bias training. And I do want to say, we get a lot of implicit bias training, or we hear a lot about implicit bias training, at least in the United States. And a lot of people don't like implicit bias training because they feel like they are being accused of having bias, right? And that it's a problem that they have. And the way that we're looking at implicit bias is really bias in processes, because everybody has bias. That's how our minds works. That's how human minds work, is to kind of have that gut instinct to say, good, bad, this, that. And so the idea with this is we're not saying, that the person has a problem, but what we want to do is we want to make sure our processes are set up, the AIS processes are set up so that people can, we can take the bias out of the process and that people can ask the question. So how do you teach people to say, well, maybe we should have, the committees that look at awards for AIS, maybe there should be some criteria for that it needs to have people from different regions, or it needs to have people of different groups or ethnicity or gender and so forth, right? It needs to be diverse. So those are the types of things that it's more the making the process, keeping bias out of the process. And so we are going to be doing some of implicit bias training with this. But again, I just want to make that point because I've heard a lot of people, they cringe when they hear implicit bias training because they think it's somebody who's going to tell them that there's something wrong with them. And that's not what this is about. This is about looking at the processes. And so this is where I get at that's kind of how we set up the grant and what we spoke of. One of the big things, this is Harry Truman. He said this a little bit nicer than the initial person who said it. I kind of like the way he phrased it, but it was not his original quote, is that it's amazing what you can accomplish if you don't care who gets the credit. And I think one of the things with the grant that we're trying to do is, though there's a team of us who are, submitted the grant, working on the grant, moving this forward, that we really want it to be AIS ownership of this. And so we've been very careful to make sure that across all the teams that we had people from all three regions, that we had people from the AIS leadership. So in our data group and our self-assessment group and the best practice group, we made sure that there were people who were AIS leaders, as well as people from the different SIGs and colleges, as well as just members from the different groups. And what we've realized is that AIS really also needs to think about that not just the three regions, because even within a particular region like Region 1, there's disparate cultural differences between North America, Central America, South America. The same when you look in the Pacific Rim, right? You have Australia, India, China. There's just so much diversity even within those regions that we really shouldn't just probably be looking at three regions. We should be looking at different regions or more regions, and kind of how to make sure that people are incorporated into the AIS and the leadership and what's going on. And we also, you see at the bottom there, that the AWIS and AAAS, we look towards other associations that had done similar things, who had best practices that we might be able to employ. Sea Changes actually did an assessment for universities that we had adopted to look at associations. I serve on their advisory board because they're looking at doing an association evaluation, assessment, self-assessment for associations. They're looking more towards just American or US based organizations. We're really looking, because we're a global organization, international organization, to look at larger than what they're actually looking at. So hopefully we'll be able to kind of set the stage, or kind of the mark for how associations should look at these issues. In addition, to kind of emphasize how we are making sure that we're not just US focused. So we were very clear when we submitted the NSF grant that this is a global international organization. We can't just be, for us to really have to truly get change in our community, we need to be more than just US centric. And so when we've conducted interviews, we have Elizabeth is an ethnographer who's done a lot of work in leadership, and women in leadership and their careers. And so she actually has done so far a number of interviews here, and you could see there's been like 12 in Region 1, 14 interviews in Region 2, and 7 in Region 3. And we tried to make sure it could be as diverse as possible. So we didn't want to just get Canada and the US, and that we wanted to get more people in different areas. And we didn't, what often happens is we miss out completely in getting people from the continent of Africa. We really tried to make an effort to make sure that we got people from different areas. So
today you can still recruit from Brazil and other places in Latin America. We have some. I get the impression we have a lot of Brazilians here. So
Well, that's what, yeah, and it was hard because we were trying to like get out there, and we will have, that's the other thing I was going to pitch, is that we will be probably having additional interviews and things at other times. And so if anybody here is interested in kind of learning more, being part of it, I'd love to connect with you so that we could make sure, because we sent out a lot of emails, and we tried to network to get people. We really want to hear about the different experiences. And we were interviewing both men and women to kind of understand what the issues were. I mean, we've had some really interesting feedback already. The regions kind of came out of that. The idea of how the cultural issues, can mean very different things for how people approach their career, and even at what age they start going into an IT career or a PhD. So yes, please contact me.
Yeah, we can help paint a little more green
Good,
in that Latin American map that is a little empty, right?
Yes.
Only Colombia, I think, is represented there.
Yeah, and we definitely love to do that. So please contact me, or we'll
Eleanor, very quickly from just the people that I saw here, very quickly, just browsing their names there, I see people from Panama, Argentina, Brazil, Chile, and Peru. In addition to, well, from Mexico, we don't have anyone now because our
Mexican expatriates. Yeah.
Careful, that was it. You were Mexico. That's all. Yeah. Yeah, no, that would be great. So yes, please, and I'll be contacting you guys if we have another round to spread the word, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right, great. So that was what I just talked about there, and I'd love to get more people involved and to do interviewing in that. That was kind of our year one. We received the grant last year about right around AMSIS, so about early August, mid-August, and right in the middle of the pandemic and everything. And we were hoping to talk to people at conferences and that, but we were still able to keep on track. And as of August 1, we're really moving into year 2 of the grant, which is now looking more strategic. So we had the data group, the self-assessment group, and the best practice group. And now we're looking at integrating teams to really look more strategic at what things can be. So are there best practices that we should be implementing that would help women in that transitional period, or when they're looking to go from associate to full? And how do we look at that strategically? So, what data do we need to collect? How do we need to get it into the association? Should it be online? Should it be at conferences? Things like that. So we're starting that work right now. We have meetings next week that are coming up that are really focused on that. And then we'll be continuing on into year 3 with still implementing, and all the things that we'll be doing here will be piloted. So we'll be piloting and collecting data as well to see how it goes, and then piloting it again to make sure with changes to see how it goes. Now I'm almost done here, but I just, for those who might think that, this is something I thought was handled, right? If you look at it, I say the struggle still continues because the simple things we think should be done already. We talk about user experience, we talk about people developing products and all these things. And if you look here, this was in 2019, but it also came up in 2020 again, or actually just in April, so 2021, is that women are 73% more likely to be injured in a car accident than a man, simply because the way that the crash test dummies have been developed based on the average man's height and weight. So we haven't, there's a lot of things that are out there still that we haven't looked at, that we haven't considered. And the fact that, if you say 73% more women, that also means that children, because they also tend to be, they don't build these crash test dummies based on men, on children. Again, they're still based on men. So these are still issues that are out there, and I think are important. And so, the struggle's not over in terms of things that we need to think about. And so here, before the next slide is just a thank you, and if you have any questions, but I'd really like to know, what's your experience been? Does this resonate with you?
So we have Andrea, go ahead.
Hi, hello everyone. Hi, Eleanor.
Hi.
Congratulations for your work. Very inspiring. I read your papers and they really caught my attention because I'm a master's student and I still have to decide for a theme to write my dissertation. And my first idea when I applied to the program was to write about the digital gender gap, which is something a little bit different, but it's still a gap, right?
Right.
In my country. And reading your papers, I was like, wow, it sort of reflects what happens in society as a role, what you and your team have discovered, right? That I mean, there is this lack of equity in academia as well, in an environment of very educated people and highly prepared people. I mean, so I was really like disappointed but not surprised. Let's put it this way. So your work is really amazing. If I decide to write about it, it's not focused on IS, but more in business. And I'd like to maybe speak to you in a few months' time, maybe.
Yeah, no, I'd be happy, because quite honestly, you know, to kind of put this in context, before 2010, when I was going through getting tenure and everything, like, you know, I was at University of Georgia, faculty all male, you know, I had a good time there. I didn't feel like there was any issues, but yet I think what's kind of happened is we've done a pretty good job of kind of that tenure process. But when you get to going from associate to full, and in some other areas, you get more in this political area, right? And this happens even in, it's kind of that glass ceiling that they talk about, that you're now all of a sudden there's issues like service, and how do you say no, and can you say no, and how do you have, you know, there's a Harvard Business Review article that's out there a couple years ago, and it actually said, well, the reason women don't negotiate for themselves is it looks bad, but women can negotiate for other women, and that's okay. So there's even different, right? So there's different ways that we have to look at doing things. And so it's very similar, right? I mean, you kind of learn, you can't just be, you can't act like a man, or like, you know, like what they say you have to act like, right? Just in one day, you have to kind of feel what works for you. And then you add on, you know, ethnicity and other factors that can impact it. And that adds additional layers to how you may not be able to just act like everybody else. There's not just a cardboard cutout way of doing things.
Yeah. And how do you think we women, like, let's put it this way, can have more men to back these kind of initiatives? Because I mean, it's important, it's an issue for everyone, not only for women, right?
That you brought up an amazing, like, hugely important point that I missed, and that's what they call allies. And that's exactly why, you know, the work that we're doing is not just women, you know, it's not just women who are associates going or full, like, it's the community, right? Because that's important. I think having men understand the issues, you know, we had a lot of people who were like, well, I have graduate students, you know, that I'm advising that are women, and I didn't realize, or, you know, I have girls, or, you know, kids, they have kids, and they're like, they don't want that to be what their children end up growing up into. So I think it really is, you've hit the nail on the head. Part of it is really having allies and making them part of the solution. There's not them and us, there's society, right? And we all are part of society. So how do we make it better for all, not just better for one or the other, right?
Yeah,
so
I found it amazing that in one of the papers you developed that table with many feasible strategies, and I found it so incredible. So very nice. Congratulations.
Thanks. I'm glad you did, and I'm happy to talk to you offline if you have any questions for your work.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrea. We have Silvio Teixeira, please.
Well, congratulations for this work, because it's very rich, and the content is relevant. So I would like to know if to the practitioners, this kind of information you share with practitioners, or it's only on an academy, because the rich material is so relevant, so the practitioners needs to access this kind of results, no?
Yeah, so I have done some talks with different groups. So like I've talked to American Financial Technology Association and some different ones about kind of these findings, because there is some work that's done more in the IT work environment. And that's kind of where we've gotten some of the support for what we're talking about. But yeah, I think, you know, a lot of this stuff, it resonates with practitioners who are out working, because it's just slightly different, right? So the whole idea of, I relate it to the glass ceiling with the full, it's still the same idea. It's still the same of, you get to a certain point and now it's not structured. It's not, how do I get to that position, right? And so we face it in academia, people out in practice face it as well. So I think there is some relevancy between the two. And I've, you know, when people have asked me to come and talk to them I've talked to them and they've seen that. But you know, I'm happy to talk to more, and I think yes, it's very relevant in a practical environment as well.
In my company, we have 19 employees. Just 20% are women, for example. And some hours ago, I shared the last paper with my boss because we need to work with that. Thank you for the
Oh, good. Oh, great. Thank you for sharing it.
Thank you, Silvia. Violeta, please go ahead.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Eleanor, for your talk. Let me see. And I would just like to share that we're starting a research with Surrey University from the UK and Brazil, where we're studying women's immobility in times of crisis. And so our starting point is how COVID affected women's life, especially researchers, not only on IS, but for academics, because we have to stay at home and take care of everything of the kids and everything else. Yes, and we have to work as well. And what I think is amazing is the number of papers that have been being published on this subject, this gender and the situation that everybody started to have during COVID. Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Andrea. Yes, so I think there's a lot of things that we can contribute and work together, I think. Yeah, so we're open for further discussion later. Yes, we're just starting. Is an interdisciplinary group. So I am from IS, and there are two that are lawyers. There's two psychologists, and yeah, and the group from Surrey, they have also different backgrounds. One of them studies the bullying on girls using on the internet for the teenagers on the internet. So there are a lot of subjects related to this new normal. Yeah, and so what we want to do right now is to write a paper on what is going to be the new normal from this situation from now. Yes. So how are we going to go back? What is normal from now on? Yes.
Yeah. No, I totally, I think that's great that what you're working on. And I'll say one thing, you know, this is something a long time ago in my college years, I took some gender course studies, right? And one of the things that always stuck with me is that, you know, women went into the workforce that was established for middle class men. Typically, right? Like if you're thinking of work environment of you know, businesses and that, but we didn't reinvent the system, right? It was like, okay, women, you can go in here, but you have to act. And we saw it in our dress code. We saw women wearing suits, right? As well as men. So it was kind of this, how do we fit into this? Whereas, so I think what we need to do now, and especially COVID shows this, is that people were able to work at home. Right? They were able to do some things. And this also gets people with disabilities who have been asking to be able to work from home and have flexible schedules. But we've come so far, but we haven't looked at the system and said, how do we change the system so that it works for more people? You know, we've just brought people in and said, this is the system. And I think that that's something as a society we may want to look at is maybe the system has to change, not the people, right? And to be more flexible.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, very nice.
Yeah. Thank you, Violeta. Alexandre Gemel, please.
Yeah, you know, I think it just touched the point that I was going to mention. You know, as a father, and I've already had this kind of discussions with Andrea at UTFPR here, and also with Rita, who's one of our professors who couldn't be here today because she has classes exactly the same time, but otherwise would be contributing to this discussion. And many times what I say is, yeah, this, I mean, it's the system. This is the system. It's not a matter of roles of men and women. It's in the system that this is already a logic of this system. We'll probably have to break the system and change the system. And I do think that the pandemic has brought at least some evidence that it's possible for example, for people to work more from home so that they can take care of the children. Yeah. And I'm here from a generation of parents where at some stage me and my wife decided, well, you go and we're both doctors, so we're both in academia, but she was lagging behind because at some stage we decided as a couple, one of us will have to take care of the children in a system that didn't even allow us in the past to share it in a way. Okay, let's each of us only work half the day, which would be something more reasonable. even
Yeah.
25 years ago, we would probably have gotten to that agreement, to that arrangement, if it was a feasible arrangement. No, it was either you work 40 hours a week or 44 hours a week, or we don't want you. And that sort of kicked, it's not that, again, I don't think that it kicked women out. It kicked someone out and kept someone in. Of course, the men were already there. So it was something that naturally happened in that system. So I usually say that, and it may be my glasses here of an older, well, not so much older, but anyway, older man who came from, or who was really engaged in that system. But I say we have to change the system, not the roles of people in the system. Men are not going to become women. Women are not going to become men. Considering that some of those stereotypes are probably more than just stereotypes, or maybe they're not. They could even be social, but they've been social for so long, from the time of the hunters and the gatherers, and that it's not something that we will solve in one generation. But changing the system is something that we can do in a generation, the same way that as we change the systems, including our digital systems in organizations and doing the digital transformation, right? So if we were able to do the digital transformation, why can't we do the kind of transformation that includes all those that did not have the same, I don't even know if it's the same opportunities, because at the same time, I regret that I did not have the possibility of spending as much of my time with my kids when they were growing up as I would have wished to. So, but you touched precisely the point that I was going to say. Maybe we have to think of ways in which we change the system, and we have a great opportunity right now, because we are in a moment of collapsing systems, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, no, I agree.
But there are many systems, don't you think? And Eleanor said it very well, that women came into a world that already existed, where middle class white men were the main inhabitants of that particular world at that point in time. But if you think about it, like in academia, right? It strikes me that you said that probably going all the way to associate, there is pretty much the same behavior between single women and married men, right? Which means married men are not taking care of the children, basically. But they do pretty much the same. But then to go to full, that's when the political issues begin. So taking care of the children is no longer the issue, right? I mean, it's like in this case, it's basically political issues based on gender. So how much is it true, depending on the discipline? Because there are certain academic disciplines that are pretty much dominated by women, right? And not probably STEM, right? But if you think about, I don't know, some arts and some other disciplines that historically have been dominated by women, I mean, does it happen the other way around, or how does it work? It would be really, really interesting to really look further into that, don't you think?
I do. I don't know if you guys have been getting the hype on Netflix, or if you guys are big into Netflix, but The Chair is a new show that's out, and it follows a humanities chair who she gets put in this position as chair, and it's still interesting.
It's an English department, isn't it?
Yeah, it's English, but so it's different, and it's interesting because you still see some of the gender dynamics there. A man and a woman who the wife ended up leaving to take care of the kids, and was just on like his, he became more prominent, but they were both very similar in terms of their careers. So yeah, I think there is some really interesting things. It's almost like I think of like with chefs, right? You have a lot more women who cook, typically, not always, right? But the chefs that are known, at least originally, were all men. And now you have some chefs who are women, but there's still kind of this, these issues that come up, like accountants, it used to get paid very well until women entered the field. So there's a lot of these things that I think that gender has a dynamic in them and a role in them. And it's not necessarily always the same, but I do think the idea of, there's a lot of books that were written about how women should negotiate and women need to negotiate, and then come to find out that they can't negotiate the same way because of how they're perceived. And that actually could be detrimental, right? So I think that there's a lot of this stuff, it's all those, like I did the picture of all the yarn mixed together, right? You have to pull one string out and kind of look at it and say, what is it doing to this, before you can really see the whole picture and kind of straighten it out and make sense of it. But it's fascinating to me. This is why I continue to look at it.
Yeah, and it has to be looked at very carefully, not to fall into the stereotypes on the other side, right? And saying that everything is discrimination, because not everything is discrimination. And be careful, be tactful. That not necessarily just because you belong to a certain group, you have a right to do whatever or to anything that looks unfair to the rest, right? So
right. No,
yeah.
exactly. And I think that's
You just have to
where,
level the ground.
yeah,
Mhm.
and I think so. So when we're talking about like intersectionality, that kind of makes it even messier because you have, you know, you have all these different. Like I look at it here. I may look like a white woman from the U.S., right? But my heritage is Italian, very social. You know, like my background in terms of my experience, first generation, kind of really going to college. So there's other factors that impact, and I think that's one of the things is just to kind of understand the different experiences and allow people to kind of succeed and help without, yeah, it's not to put one group down. That's why it's like, it's not to not help men or not help a particular group, right? It's to kind of make it so that we raise it so that it's like all the boats get higher,
Right.
It's not so that one comes down and one, but that they are all equal.
Exactly. Alexandre.
Yeah, in our chat, Mateus is already proposing that we hack the system, right? And being a proposal of chaotic systems here, I agree with him. But what I think is that if we don't do that, and if we don't use these opportunities that even the COVID, the pandemic gave us of challenging the old system and showing that there are new ways of doing things, I will have to keep giving my daughter the same advice that I always gave her. I always told her, show them that you're much better than them. Even within their following their rules, but of course that usually means wear let's say a suit to participate in a meeting, which is something that would only turn her into a man in the system, let's say.
That pretty much says the same about the groups, that because you belong to this group, you have to work harder, right? Violeta, please.
Yeah, no, I just want to compliment that in this group we're working on, we like men in the group because we don't want to discriminate men from the group, because otherwise we just get the women's point of view. And I think that it's important to have both sides. Yes, I don't know how it's in your groups, Eleanor, because that's what we are missing, some men in our group to discuss about women.
Well, yeah, and I think, you know, bringing them, you know, we brought a lot of women, a lot of men in diversity through the working groups that we had. So that's, you know, because we really felt we weren't going to get any buy-in either if it was just looked at as it's just women complaining about, you know, this. And the one thing I also feel, kind of to get to Guillermo and Alexandria, your point is that I think we need role models to get to the position. We've seen this in some other STEM fields, right? When you get women that get to full and become a role model and then can break that, you know, how people think they have to be, right? So you see, you know, like I don't necessarily have to dress in a suit all the time, right? Or I could talk about my kids. I could say it's the same thing that bosses outside from a more practitioner point of view used to say, like, I can say I have a son, I pick, you know, I'm in charge of picking him up from school. That doesn't mean that at midnight, if there's something due the next day, that I'm not writing, you know, into the night to do that. You know, so my performance of being able to do stuff, but to be able to also have that flexibility and to show that as a role model for other women, I think that's important. That's what we, you know, that you don't have to be a man to have this flexibility. There's women that you can see, and that's very much if you can't see it, you can't be it. Well, you need to be able to see that women can do this, right? They can be flexible.
Become the living. Let's read some of the comments that we have here from Mateus. This topic is very important when it comes to a broader perspective. The system and archetypes of what is feminine and masculine affect both men and women. Let's hack the system. That's what Alexandra was saying. And from Jackson Cardoso, in the development of user interfaces, it is very important that the developer is very perfectionist. Characteristics well presented in the female universe. Do you agree, Eleanor? You're an expert in interfaces.
Well, no, I do think that, you know, you have to have who your audience is going to be, right? I mean, if you're designing, and you know, I'm thinking about like gamers, or, you know, if you're designing seatbelts where you're going to have 50-50 of people driving cars, you need to be able to be thinking about both of them, right? I'm waiting for somebody to come out with like, we've tested this on, you know, women and men crash test dummies and found that they were, and then everybody's going to flock to that car because it's going to be safer for your kids, right? But I think that that's the thing. You need to make sure that you look at in interfaces, you look at who your users are, and then you grow with that, and you make sure that you can do that. That whole idea of universal design is important, because it's only going to make you more nimble in terms of how you can position if you're creating a product.
I guess Jackson was referring more to the fact that women are very more into detail, right? pay attention
Oh,
to detail.
yes.
So
Okay,
that basically they are more perfectionist in that sense, and the design is a little more.
But at the same time, Guillermo, commenting on you saying that Eleanor was an expert in interface, I remember that when I was still a graduate student, and I'm sure at least 10 years older than Eleanor, I read many of her papers on web call and everything, because that was what we had to read to understand the beginning of e-commerce.
I mean, web call is a classic. You cannot miss it. So.
That's what I tell people when I try to explain to my students. I say, you know, you have to understand, like, my MBA was about this thing called the World Wide Web. Like, I had my project was about.
But you know, Eleanor, you're like how do you call him? Gee, I forgot his name. The guy from the Matrix. Matrix.
Oh.
Can you read?
Neo.
You're like him. We
Neo.
look at you and we see web call even 20 years later. You know.
I know, and it's one of those things that I haven't spent as much time on it as I probably
No,
because
yeah, for sure. And I'm sorry to tell you that, you know, we still think of you and we still think on that.
You
one,
are
but it
this
was
close
very
from
impactful.
becoming as famous as Tam.
Oh, well, there you go. Yeah.
Well, that would be a course. That would be a course. Thank God it didn't happen, because then we would all be hating you instead of praising you.
Yeah, we don't want you that far.
No.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
I don't know. Any other comments or questions for Eleanor?
I want one more comment on.
Violeta, thank you.
Sorry, I don't want to. I don't know if there are other people wanting to talk.
No, go ahead. You're the only one.
Yeah, and when we think about cultural aspects, I've been in Norway for 1 year, and there the situation is the opposite. It's a more women's society. So usually men don't want to get married because they know that the woman will take care of everything. So and it was interesting because like some roles like picking up the kids usually would be, it's very normal that the man would do that, and a lot of things, you know, housework is the man who does it. So it was really interesting to see these cultural differences and how they see the world. I mean, how the world is different in these societies, and yes, it exists.
Yeah, no, definitely. The Scandinavian countries tend to be very good at demonstrating how you can kind of manage with both parents. They've actually done really interesting too in their educational systems, I think. Having done things with people, you know, with disabilities and mental health, that how they've been able to kind of keep childhood, and yet their students still do very well. Versus, you know, the other research I do in looking at disabilities is, you know, mental health. One of the things that I think is that, at least in the United States and probably in some other countries, we put so much pressure on young kids to be perfect, right? They can't make mistakes, that by the time we see them in college, they have anxiety and depression and, you know, all these other issues. And I think that like Norway, Finland, places like that have done a really good job of kind of allowing it. They've done good at the gender roles where they can kind of, you know, be whatever works, and also to be able to, as a child, be just a child, so that they're not increasing all this stress and anxiety in people. That's just a little aside of things.
Everything is there in wine. Do we have any other questions or comments? Well, I guess we're going to have to cut it short this time, Alexander.
No worries. I think we had a lot of participation here, and I think this is we see that this is a topic that we definitely have to have discussed in our groups. I think it was Andrea. Someone was mentioning there
I think it was
in the
Andrea,
chat
the third time, right?
It's the third time that we get to gender issues in our.
Yes.
Of course, this was pretty focused on gender, but it's the third time during our research seminars of this semester only that gender issues become something that we discuss here. So
At the end of the
definitely is a topic that we.
At the end of the seminar, you have to share the composition of the participation of the people who come to the talks. And
What do you mean?
I mean, how many women, how many men, and who does the talking?
Well, yeah, to some
Not
extent, I think.
only the keynotes, but all the people who are participating.
Yeah, I think to some extent that's something that is sort of easy to raise here, because we do have the data. Huh? Well, okay, well, thank you very much, Eleanor. Thank you very much, everyone. I just want to show you that next week we're going to have Anal, but that I can never pronounce his surname. But anyway, Anal is someone else who has also written so many interesting things, and he will be here talking to us about the automated coding and scoring of text documents. So please be all here with us next week to have Anal with us.
Bhattacharjee, right?
Bhattacharjee, yeah. I can never. I mean, I remember that once. I think when we were in Confirm in Chile a few years ago, we were both in the same. We were both in the same panel, and I said, I swear I will get his name right. And when we got there, I said, well, just. No.
Never swear in vain.
Almost impossible. But anyway, we'll ask him to say it without a mouthful next week. But I can tell you, he's done some very interesting things. In fact, he even has one thing that is very, very good for us. He has a book, a free book, an open book on methods that is available online. That I remember that once Aurora Sanchez and I told him that we would be involved in translating to Portuguese and Spanish. I did a couple of chapters here with the help of some friends, and then we had other stuff to do, and I'll have to embarrassedly ask him for excuses because we never finished the project. But he did finish it's a huge book, some 500
and at
pages.
the end, we're less effective than Google. We need to
Well,
stop
by now, I don't think that he even needs translators any longer. Google does a great job. But anyway, we'll have to remember asking.
Back in the old days, it was terrible. Yeah.
As well. All right. Okay. Well, thank you very much, guys. Thank you very much,
everybody. Thank you, Eleanor.
And feel free to join us whenever you have the time. To see that we end up talking about gender. We end up talking about all different things in addition to the topic of the day here. Thank you very much for bringing Eleanor to talk to us.
I have to twist her arm a little bit, but she's good.
Great. See ya.
Bye. Thank you.